The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, America. Good morning, world. Good morning, CHD. Welcome. Once again, my name is Michael Kane. I'm the Director of Advocacy here at Children's Health Defense. Today, is there free speech in America? I have an all-star lineup here. Mary Holland, Jeffrey Tucker, Dr. Kheriaty to discuss the recent settlements that have happened regarding the original Missouri v. Biden case, as well as a Children's Health Defense case. Breaking news yesterday. There's a landmark settlement there as well, too. And then we're going to have the People vs. Poison. Stephanie Lucretia is interviewing Vari Hani, and this is going to be, you definitely don't want to miss this. This is a jam-packed hour. Stay tuned to the entire thing. So in these settlements dealing with free speech, 2 years ago, when the Missouri v. Biden case, then Murphy v. Missouri, as it changed names, went to the Supreme Court, and we had the rally to reclaim free speech. We had so many heavyweights, especially from the medical freedom movement. Mary Holland was there. Del Bigtree spoke. Jeffrey Tucker. Dr. Kheriaty was actually inside as a plaintiff, but came out, and God bless him, actually got on the mic and spoke. Pierre Corey, so many more, on and on and on. And it just broke yesterday, it just broke last week that in this case, there was a landmark settlement. Defender covered this. Judgment in landmark censorship case delivers spectacular win for free speech. There's some great things that happened there, but some things we need to talk about. We got the great panel for this. And then yesterday, Children's Health Defense, this was breaking news yesterday. We won a settlement in a related censorship case to this as well, too. So I'm not going to say much more because I'm definitely not the expert in this area. I have the three experts here. We're going to bring them on. Before we do that, let's go through some news clips. Actually, we have some breaking news right now. It's not a good one, though. Governor Kathy Hocal introduced legislation to preserve vaccine mandates that goes so far as to take the FDA out of the equation, meaning experimental shots could be mandated for children in the state of New York if this bill goes through. This bill is in direct response to what's happening at the federal health agencies, where Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has sought to bring this concept of shared decision-making into the fold, where parents, believe it or not, have some choice in what happens with their kids. This is in direct response to that, trying to stop these much-needed reforms. It's interesting this bill was introduced at the behest of Governor Hocal 2 days after Children's Health Defense rallied at the Capitol in Albany. We had hundreds of people that came out rallying in the hallways of Albany. We had an amazing rally. We had Mary Holland, of course, speaking there. John Gilmore was there. We had many vaccine-injured individuals. Tremel Thompson, Vice President of Local 100, was there. We had Mark Gorton, the president of MAHA Institute, talking about the massive epidemic of vaccine industry. There was dozens and dozens. Oh, there's my guy, Angelo. Angelo is a brilliant young man with Down syndrome who's vaccine injured, but that doesn't stop him from cutting a rug and dancing it up. We have fun when we're there, when we rally. We had over 50 meetings, very impactful day. It was truly an amazing day. And here's Shantisha. God bless her and her family. She lost her 1-year-old baby after she was given 6 shots at one time that contained 12 vaccines. Her 1-year-old died 1 year later. She's from Rochester, New York. God bless Shantisha for coming and speaking, telling her story to hundreds of people, to thousands watching online, and to powerful lawmakers in Albany. One other piece of news before we get into this. Representative Boebort has written a letter to Donald Trump on the tails of Representative Greg Steube, asking for Trump to strengthen the religious exemptions and to consider executive action in this regard. Thank you to Representative Boebort. We're having a growing number of elected officials drawing attention to multiple states that deny the First Amendment, that deny religious exemption to vaccination in their states. And thankfully, this issue is getting national attention and getting lawmakers across the country saying, hey, something needs to be done about this. So thank you so much to Representative Boebort. Before I bring on this all-star lineup to speak, I want to go back 2 years and just show quickly Dr. Kheriaty, Jeffery Tucker, and Mary Holland speaking in front of the Supreme Court almost exactly 2 years ago to the date, just about, when Murphy v. Missouri landmark censorship case was being heard in D.C. Let's go to those clips.
That's why this case is so important. That's why this issue of free speech is so important. And it should be important not just to the medical freedom movement, but to any citizen of the United States, because if they can do it on issues related to public health, if they could do it on issues related to the elections, they could do it on anything. And in fact, the documents that we got on discovery in our case indicate that they were starting to do it on anything and everything, right?
The people who want to control speech seize on the technologies, whatever they are. Radio, television, right? That's why the Federal Radio Commission became the Federal Communications Commission, just in case some new technology came along that needed control, which in fact it did, called the TV, right? So, but every time they go after the technologies, because that's how information is distributed, right? So it's not. Back in the old days, it wasn't about you and me. It was really about the editors of newspapers. It was about producers of television shows. This is the people who got jailed. This is the people who were targeted by government. And why? Because the ambition of every tyrant from the beginning of time, from time immemorial, is to curate the public mind. Right? To control what we think by giving us only a certain kinds of information so that we arrive at certain conclusions, so that we'll be more loyal subjects.
When the government is telling social media, take it down or else, which is essentially what they did, that's a threat. And government always has quite a bit of power to do things.
Quite a bit of power to do things. With that, let's bring on this lineup. Mary Holland, Dr. Aaron Kheriaty, and Jeffery Tucker. Thank you so much for joining me today. Welcome to CHD TV.
Great to be here.
Nice to be here. Good to be
All
here.
right. So the breaking news just yesterday, I even only found out just yesterday, is that CHD now joins, having been able to settle its case. Mary, why don't you talk just a little bit about that? What was this case? How was it related to the Missouri case? And what happened in the settlement?
Yeah. So we filed Kennedy versus Biden back in 2023. And the case was fully consolidated with Missouri v. Biden in the same court before Judge Terry Doty in Louisiana. And so we were consolidated. We didn't intervene. It wasn't the same case, but for purposes of discovery, it was the same. We were saying that we weren't suing, as Missouri v. Biden was, the social media platforms. We were suing the federal officials who were calling up the social media platforms and threatening them in violation of the First Amendment. So we were saying, you federal government officials are not permitted to violate the First Amendment. And we got a settlement. I think negotiations were going on at the same time. Our case was settled. We're not party to the consent decree that Dr. Kheriaty and Mr. Tucker will talk about it. But we had a settlement. We've dismissed the case. We've all stipulated that it was resolved. And we did get some legal fees to cover the costs of taking this case all the way through to the Supreme Court and then back down to the trial court. In our case, there was no question, as there was in Missouri v. Biden, that Children's Health Defense and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had standing, so-called, meaning that there was no question that the government officials were saying, shut down Bobby Kennedy and shut down CHD, take them off the platforms, throttle any posts that they put up. And so we were very much a part of this litigation, and we are thrilled with the outcome. It's not everything we wanted, and I'm sure Aaron and Jeffrey will address that, but it's really important that the consent decree that they won covers the next 10 years. That's a big deal. Things are going to change over 10 years. None of us know exactly how they're going to change. But free speech is the cornerstone of any kind of a democracy. And without it, democracy dies.
So let's bring on Aaron Kheriaty, Jeffrey Tucker. Why don't you talk about what happened in your settlement, the consent decree? Dr. Kheriaty, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So briefly, the consent decree basically says that the government, certain agencies named in the consent decree, are not allowed to pressure social media companies, several of which were named in the consent decree, to remove so-called disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, which are not legal terms. They're not even terms related to truth, because malinformation is literally true things that are inconvenient for those in power. If you look at the definition of that rather silly term, that alone does not give the government license to pressure social media companies, coerce them, threaten them to remove content, to change their algorithms such that that content would be less visible. And so we put a dent in the censorship machinery. In a settlement, you don't get everything that you want. You have to negotiate. And so the settlement is narrowly tailored to be enforceable only to the plaintiffs in our case. And the courts have been very careful especially over the last year since the Supreme Court ruling in a case called Trump v. Casa, to basically apply their rulings only to the plaintiffs and not try to, utilize the courts to make sweeping generalizations that would strike down entire pieces of legislation or entire executive orders. And that kind of judicial restraint can be a good thing in many circumstances to reduce the risk of so-called lawfare, of the courts getting out of control and going beyond their remit. Courts are supposed to apply law to particular cases. So in our case, would I rather have had a broader ruling that applied to all Americans for all time and all social media companies and all government agencies? Yes, of course I would. But at the same time, what our case does for others who are not specifically named in our case is it sets a strong legal precedent with some really excellent language about what the government can and cannot do, sets a strong precedent in federal court that other cases can then easily cite. So anyone else bringing a suit can now say, well, look, the facts in our case are analogous to Missouri v. Biden or analogous to Kennedy v. Biden. Therefore, the court should rule in the same way in our case as they did in that case. And that's how the legal system works when it comes to federal court. You have to establish precedents in order to sort of pave the way for new cases. And so I think our case did that, and our case did something else that's very important. And that's, we fought not only in the legal courts, but we fought in the court of public opinion. And I always said from the beginning of our case, a big reason why we have to do this is not just to persuade the judge that we're in the right, but to persuade the American people that not only are we in the right, but that this is happening in the first place. And so the 20,000 pages of documents that we got on discovery, basically what we were able to find in our case that was being revealed alongside the Twitter files. After Elon Musk bought Twitter, he opened the backdoor channels of communications to some intrepid journalists who described to the American people what was going on. I think those two things put this censorship issue on the map for the American people, allowed us to basically uncover the inner workings of what some journalists have called the censorship industrial complex, make this an issue in the 2020 election and the vice presidential debate that was leading up to the 2020 election. And basically on day one of Trump's term in office, we got an executive order vowing to dismantle this censorship machinery. I don't think any of those developments would have been possible without Kennedy v. Biden and Missouri v. Biden.
Yeah, that's excellent commentary. Thank you for that. In the clip we played of you 2 years ago, you had said that this censorship is not going to just stay with the medical freedom movement. There's signs it's going to expand. There's a war right now, and going on in the Middle East. It doesn't really matter where your politics fall. If you're for free speech, you're for free speech. It means we need to hear things we don't want to hear. And Jeffrey, back 2 years ago when you just latched onto this issue, you were writing nonstop about about it. When I had you on the show, you said you were worried about the Supreme Court justices pulling back the floorboards, as I think you said, and seeing this massive industrial censorship complex, as Dr. Kheriaty said, and kind of being like, oh my God, what do we do with this? And it kind of makes sense to me that going narrow became safe, or became like, okay, we need to deal with this injustice, but let's deal with this injustice, because I don't know what to do with all of that beneath me. But I'd love to hear your comments on this.
Well, I'm just so grateful for first of all, for Aaron's excellent roundup just now, but for the litigants in general, they didn't have to do this. I mean, none of them got paid for it. It was a huge pain in the neck. It went on for years and years and years. They're subjected to all sorts of smears and attacks throughout the whole thing. But during this period, we got a discovery. We were able to explain to the American people and to understand the fullness of this machinery that had come to weirdly control the public mind. In the spring of 2020, the machine was already in place, but it was deployed as soon as the COVID lockdowns hit. And I had been unaware that the power was there. I had also been unaware of the tools that the social media companies had to throttle your reach, to just arbitrarily take your accounts down, to delete your posts, and watching it happen in real time was a shock, because, as you mentioned, I was inveighing against these lockdowns very early on. One post I had slipped through the censors at Facebook, and I watched as millions upon millions of people saw my commentary, and I had never seen anything like it. And what I realized was, oh, this one just slipped through. They'll never let that happen again. And sure enough, they didn't. Right after that, I was shut down. But that was revealing to me, because I realized just how intense the censorship was. Many other people just had their accounts taken down. I somehow miraculously held on to my Twitter account, but many other people lost theirs. Posts deleted constantly from LinkedIn, which by the way is not mentioned in the consent decree. So LinkedIn is still is excluded from that consent decree, right? But in the big picture, what we have here is a country deeply, deeply blessed with the First Amendment. That's why free speech is freer in the U.S. than it is in Europe today and many other countries. This First Amendment has been such a blessing to us, but it doesn't enforce itself. It needs passionate citizens to get out there and fight for it.
Yes.
And the plaintiffs in this Missouri Biden case really stuck their necks out and risked their reputations and spent vast amounts of unpaid time on this for years to fight for the rights of the American people, for the cause of free speech. And now we end up with this consent decree, which, if you read it, at first look, it seems great, and then you look at the details and you think, well, this is not as good as it could have been, and that is true. But I think Aaron's point about the PR victory here is crucial. We were able to draw attention to it and document this. We've been able to draw up maps of the censorship industrial complex, and how the whole system works. And it's been education for all of us, and exposing this was so effective that at some point, people couldn't deny it anymore. Mark Zuckerberg went on Joe Rogan, I think about a year ago, and just admitted the whole thing. Said, "Yeah, government was calling me saying you need to take that, to censor all these posts and take all this stuff down. And yeah, we went along with it. We probably shouldn't have. I didn't really want to, but I did it anyway because I didn't know what the effects of that would be." Well, this is gold, right? I mean, this is what the plaintiffs have been engaged in discovery for years to get these people to admit it. And there he was on Joe Rogan just admitting it. That never would have happened without this hard work and all these attorneys and the passion and moral courage it took to rally behind the First Amendment as a core principle of American life. So we're not fully protected yet. We have a long way to go, but I would say this is an excellent this and the CHD agreement with the Justice Department. These are two outstanding pillars in defense of free speech. I'll say one other thing. I was disappointed that the mainstream media did not give more attention to the Missouri Biden case. They just sort of buried it, with the exception of the Washington Post, which ran a lead editorial and said this is a great victory for free speech. So why did they say that? Well, they're concerned about their own rights now that the shoe's on the other foot, and the potential censors represent a different political interest from the Washington Post, so they need free speech. So they celebrated this decision. And the truth is, we all need free speech. This is not a partisan issue.
Well, Jeffrey, you bring up the Washington Post. Mary, CHD is involved in censorship litigation that the Washington Post is intimately linked to. Talk about that as well. That's not done yet, I don't think.
No, that's not done. So we do have a case against legacy media, including the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Associated Press, BBC. They all called themselves the Trusted News Initiative. And this is a case in DC federal court. They had a conspiracy. They had an open cabal saying, we are the Trusted News Initiative, and these upstarts like CHD and lots of other online news providers, they're stealing our lunch. This is not about truth, although they said they were truthful. This is about money. And so that case is ongoing. But I do want to point out a couple of things, that three of the plaintiffs in cases, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Martin Kulldorff, and Jay Bhattacharya, they are all now in very high-level positions in health in the United States. And that's also in part because they did stand up to this. And I also just want to say that the defendants in this case, the social media companies, do include Facebook, Instagram, Twitter or X, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So those are all of the defendants that are actually affected directly by the consent decree that Aaron and co-plaintiffs.
Are we sure that LinkedIn is mentioned in there? If so, then I misstated that. Then
no, it's fine. But it's paragraph 25. It's important that it was. I just want to mention all of the ones that are.
Well, that was a correction. I appreciate that.
So the last thing I want to end here is technology. This was Jeffrey's 2 years ago in front of the Supreme Court noted how the federal government, excuse me. He noted how the federal government was very aware that technology is how these ideas spread. Technology is how the public mind can prosper and turn against the government, or how it can be enslaved and be taken over by government or other related interests. We have a new censorship paradigm, perhaps. We're in the age of AI now. Dr. Kheriaty, you were talking about this right before we came on here. Why don't you talk to us? Do they need the same type of censorship abilities they had before? Is something new happening? What's going on with the tech?
So with our case, we literally had human beings flagging posts. I mean, using algorithms to scrape the internet, find out what threatens to go viral, but then having human eyeballs on it, flagging posts, putting together. There was a whole ticketing system where they could send these things through the government to the social media companies. But all that's now being outsourced to algorithms and to, as you pointed out, AI. And one of the major ethical challenges with AI is the question of who is responsible. Where there's no personal agency where you could say this. There's a locus of responsibility here, someone we can drag before the court who has to answer for free decisions that they made. And so the censorship is really going to be subtle and difficult to detect and difficult to know, even if you find it, who's responsible and who can be held to account. So that's a major new challenge of the social media /AI age that we're entering into. The novelist Walter Kern, who has followed this issue in these cases very closely, compared it to an engineer at a soundboard mixing a record in terms of controlling what people can see, where, some tweet or some story threatens to go viral and he could just reach up and turn the volume down on the snare drum. It can also work in the direction of artificially boosting things that are not organically taking hold. Turn the volume up on, we got to have more cowbells. So we'll just tinker with these. Well, so that was being done by human beings.
and now it's being done by machines, right? So how do we get a handle on that? I think that moving forward is going to be a major issue for us to try to address with these novel technologies.
Jeffrey, do you have a comment on that? And technology is something you've long looked at, long before COVID. What do you think about the direction censorship technology is going?
It's a terrifying issue that there will be no more defendants against whom to litigate in the age of AI. But I think what it makes the point that these independent outlets like Brownstone and CHD and so many others, and I think we know who they are and they exist. People need to support these outlets and get their news from them and adhere to them to find alternative points of view, because the old mainstream corporate media is still not free. I mean, they're still censoring. I deal with this, and you do, every single day. They're curating their news and what they say in order to mold the public mind. So if you want to maintain your freedom, you have to look at alternative places like CHD and Brownstone and so many other people, because we're not going to be using AI to control the content of what you see. We're out here to offer an alternative point of view, hopefully adhere more closely to the truth rather than just curating the culture in a ways that serve powerful interests. That's not what we're about. We're about the opposite. We're about defeating powerful interests on behalf of essential human rights and freedoms. And so the need for these alternatives has never been more clear. And I would say these court victories just underscore the point that alternatives are needed now more than ever.
That's an excellent place for us to land and to end here. Mary Holland, Aaron Kheriaty, Jeffrey Tucker, thank you so much for joining us here. Congratulations on the victories, one of many to come and a lot more battles to fight. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
All right, fantastic. Don't go anywhere. You need to stay, because my colleague, Stephanie Lucretio, has an interview that she conducted with Vani Hari talking about the people over poison, going back to the Supreme Court in April. I think it's April 27th. Let's check in the interview up here. Don't quote me, I might have gotten the date wrong, but a whole bunch of groups, CHD is going to be a part of this, going to the Supreme Court because Bayer and Monsanto are in the Supreme Court saying, just like vaccine manufacturers, their chemicals need a liability shield. Let's go to that interview.
Good morning, defenders of truth, freedom, and children's health. Good morning, CHD. My name is Stephanie Lucretio, and I'm so excited to be with you this morning. We are bringing on a guest who I have looked up to and admired for years. She actually is one of the reasons that I became an activist. Started with food advocacy, and here I am decades later. So with no further ado, I'm so excited to bring on Vani Hari. She's a food activist, best-selling author, and the founder of Food Babe and Truvani. She's helped so many people recognize the dangers hidden in their food and also is making waves in the food industry. So welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It is an honor to be here. Thank you so much for your tireless work. It's incredible what this organization does, and I just really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
We love to have you here, and we're so grateful for all that you're doing. So tell me, because you've been at it for a while, what opened your eyes to all of the things that's in our food, what it's doing to our bodies, and just give us a little bit of history on your journey into activism.
Sure. I grew up with two immigrant Indian parents, and when they came here to the United States, they were very trusting of the American food supply. They really adopted the American lifestyle and allowed me and my sibling to eat whatever we wanted. As long as we were fed and it was cheap, I was allowed to eat it. And so several times a week, I ate fast food. My mom didn't know how to cook the American food. She knew how to cook her traditional Indian food where she was from, but she didn't know how to cook American food. So she heavily relied on the processed food industry to provide what was easy for her to make because, she was a teacher. My dad was a teacher. They were working hard, trying to make a living here in America. And they just wanted things that were fast and easy. And as a result, I had just about every health issue as a child. And when my parents took me to the doctor's offices, no one asked me what I was eating. They didn't ask my parents what I was eating. There was no emphasis on nutrition whatsoever. It was take this pharmaceutical drug, take this shot, take this pill. And it was something that, I was in this cycle of never ending suffering with my skin, with my asthma, with my allergies, with my stomach issues. And in my early 20s, when I had 2 abdominal surgeries, one for appendicitis and the other one for endometriosis, I hit rock bottom. I decided to take health as my number one priority and started to learn about what I was eating. And what I found out shocked me. I couldn't believe that the majority of foods that I was eating were dead processed food. And that's how I felt for most of my life, dead and zombie-like. And when I started to make a change of eating that dead food, the food that's in the interior of the grocery store that has a package or a plastic wrapper with a long ingredient list, when I started to eliminate those foods and go to one ingredient whole foods and cooking at home and teaching myself how to cook, things started to dramatically change. I lost weight, my skin issues cleared up, all of my health issues started to vanish, and I went off 9 prescription drugs, started to live a life that I never thought was possible. And the things that I started doing started to get the attention of people around me at work, at home, my friends, my dear family. And they started to ask questions. What are you doing? What is this green drink you're drinking? Why are you paying attention to ingredients? Why aren't you the candy queen anymore? Why don't you eat Runts and Skittles? And I started to teach them things that I was learning about artificial food dyes, about sugar, about the chemicals and how they affect your body, and started to teach them about additives and how they make the food more addictive and how I didn't want to be part of that experiment anymore. And the people around me really hadn't figured out this information for themselves yet. So I was kind of like the first foray into this subject matter of what's really in your food. And so they said, Bonnie, what you're telling us is really remarkable and what you're uncovering. Can you share more, like on a website or a blog or something like that? And blogs were really taking off at the time. And this is now over 10 years ago. And I decided to start a blog and call it Food Babe. I didn't want to call it Food Babe at first. I wanted to call it eathealthyliveforever.com. But my husband, who's a tech geek in the family, thought that was a terrible name and came up with the name Food Babe, bought it $10 on auction. And the rest is really history. I started to share what I was learning about my food, the ways that I'd been duped by the food industry, things that I thought were healthy, like a Chick-Fil-A chicken sandwich. I thought it was a healthier fast food than McDonald's and Wendy's and Burger King, but it was the same ingredients, the same long list of ingredients, 100 ingredients in a Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich, I found out. And started to share that information in a way that's never been shared before. Social media, this was around the start of Facebook and Instagram. And so I was able to share these ideas very rapidly and quickly and virally, if you will. And it really started to create this community of people that not only care about their own health, but they wanted to hold these companies accountable. And so when I started writing about the things that I was finding, the moms and the people online, the everyday citizens, they started contacting these companies and saying, why? Subway, how can you say your food is eating fresh when your sandwich has 50 different chemicals in it and chemicals that are banned in other countries? How, Chick-fil-A, why is one of the first ingredients in your sandwich MSG, something they feed to rats to make them fat in obesity studies, right? And so they were calling these companies and just showing their outrage. And eventually these companies started to call me. And it was Chick-fil-A was one of the first ones to call me and invite me to their headquarters to consult on the changes of their ingredients and their menu items. And I was able to get some remarkable things accomplished from that meeting. But there's a lot of improvement that still needs to happen within the food industry. Our food has been poisoned with chemicals that are used for the production of farming, all the way to what's actually in the ingredients, to the additives that are allowed for use here in the United States. We have over 10,000 chemicals allowed for use here in the United States, but in Europe, there's only like 400. This discrepancy that we have for what's being fed to us here in the United States versus other countries is really unethical and hypocritical. And it's something that, I took on full force when I eventually decided to quit my day job. I was a consultant. I had a very lucrative, accelerated career as a consultant at big financial institutions when I started my blog, and I was, blogging at night and on the weekends. But eventually, after, companies like Chick-Fil-A were reaching out for me to change the menus and ingredients, I realized I had a much bigger calling, that I wanted to try to change the food industry instead of the banks. And so I quit my job, and I quit it cold turkey. But one of the first things that I did when I realized, I don't have a 401k anymore, I don't have health insurance, I don't have income, I had all of this time for the first time to really study what had been done to the American food supply. And I started to compare ingredient lists from products that are sold here in the United States to the exact same products being sold in other countries. And the things that I found out were horrific, that McDonald's French fries is less than 4 ingredients in Europe. But here it's, 18, it was 18 ingredients at the time, and many very controversial chemicals and additives that don't have safety studies. I found out that Quaker Oats, strawberries and cream here in the United States had artificially dyed petroleum-based dyes of little apple bits to make the strawberries red, to make it seem red in the strawberries and cream oatmeal. But in Europe, they were using real strawberries. So our food has been fake, and it's full of poison and full of these additives here in the United States. And I showcased these side-by-side images on the blog, and it was a blog post that it was the most viral blog post of that year. And it's what allowed me eventually to take on some of these giants like Kraft macaroni and cheese, and getting them to remove artificial food dyes like they had in other countries, getting Subway to remove a very controversial additive out of their bread that's used in yoga mats and shoe rubber, and then asking the beer companies to release the ingredients in beer for the first time in history, because that was the one thing when I opened up my fridge, my husband's beer was the one thing I didn't have the ingredient list on, and I couldn't believe that we were buying something without knowing what was done, put inside this bottle, and knowing what had been done to the food industry. I know alcohol industry was also doing it, right? Putting all kinds of additives to make the alcohol even more addictive and things like that. And that's exactly what they were doing. And they were adding sugar like corn syrup and natural flavors and caramel color and all kinds of carcinogens to the actual alcohol carcinogen. I mean, I was asking questions that had really never been asked before, and holding these companies accountable in a way that had never been done before. But what I realized is that, asking the food companies to keep changing was a game of whack-a-mole, and also nobody was holding these companies accountable. Back in 2015, there was so much widespread awareness about chemicals in food that the food industry voluntarily decided, hey, we're going to remove artificial food dyes. Kellogg's and General Mills and Mars and others, removed dyes, or said they were going to remove dyes. But then nobody followed up with them and made sure they did it. And instead they lied to the public, and they continued selling dyes in all of their food. And it wasn't until, I decided to make this issue known at the Senate hearing back in 2024, the American Nutrition Roundtable that was led by Senator Ron Johnson, that this issue didn't get national attention. It was that moment where Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was in the room and heard my testimony about how so many concerned citizens have been holding these companies accountable, trying to get them to remove these additives that don't belong in our food that they've already removed in other countries. And we're the ones, American children are the ones suffering. And he really heard my message and took that actually to the campaign trail. And it was a really hopeful moment that finally we might be able to get some of these additives removed from our food supply here in the United States. And I think it's been an amazing moment for our leadership to talk about these issues for the first time ever. And it also introduced me back into the world of politics, which I left because I was so disheartened and so fed up, if you will. Back in 2012, I became a delegate for President Barack Obama. I ran to be a delegate based on the fact that I wanted to hold him accountable for the fact that he hadn't labeled GMOs. At that point, we didn't know whether we were eating a GMO or not. And I really thought that because 60 other countries had labeled genetically engineered ingredients, that transparency is really important for consumers to understand what they're consuming. And I was very concerned about the chemicals being sprayed on GMO crops. Those chemicals like Roundup, which one of the main ingredients in Roundup is called glyphosate. This is something that I ended up protesting on the front row of the Democratic National Convention in front of the Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, with a big sign that said labeled GMOs written in lipstick. And I wanted the opportunity to bring this subject forward because it was one that was just ignored by the administration, even though Michelle Obama had been pushing certain issues forward. The real fundamental issues of transparency and what we were eating were not being addressed. And so it was a moment to hold that administration accountable, even though I had put them in office, right? And I think what's really interesting about this moment that we're in right now, where we've had such incredible progress when it comes to American culture, we're now allowed to talk about chemicals in food on the news, right? For so long, we couldn't do that, right? Even, I know there's lots of topics that CHD, delves into, and I think you feel the same way, is that, this is a new era of communication, that we're able to talk about these issues in a way that's never profoundly been available to us until now. And that's really exciting. And I think that's going to change American culture more than anything, is because now we have a whole new group of individuals that largely weren't part of the crunchy hippie crowd that cared about these food issues, now tuned in and learning about what's been done to our food. And yeah, they see the side-by-side comparisons of what the US has versus other countries. And they're like, why are we getting the short end of the stick? Why do we have to get poisoned? Why are these companies allowed to use these chemicals here in the United States, but they voluntarily remove them for other countries? We deserve the same safer ingredients here in the United States. And I think the same issue is true with the chemicals in farming. And I think what's really interesting is that we have a situation happening within the political climate, but also within the food movement. We have more awareness than ever on food chemicals, which is so exciting. But on the same hand, we have a direct assault happening from one of the biggest chemical corporations in the world, Bayer, who bought Monsanto several years ago and is now getting sued for causing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And juries across the nation, after reviewing hundreds and hundreds of hours of court material and evidence from both sides, and Bayer having the best lawyers, right, having the most money and the best lawyers to fight on their behalf, have sided with the victims, saying that this product causes cancer. And now this company has used its lobbying force and its money in Washington in a way that has captured our politicians, has captured the executive branch of our government, has captured state legislators, has captured our Congress in a way that I am witnessing firsthand how corrupt it is. And I think what is so important about what's been going on, and I'll talk about a couple things that have happened that have led us to this moment, is that even though we've had tremendous progress to get the food pyramid flipped upside down and showcase more real food and get the government to say eat real food, to get artificial food dyes removed from now half of the food industry voluntarily, getting new scientific review done on a dozen other chemicals that are very problematic in the food supply. All of that work is profound. But I think where things are happening, where it's an inconsistent nature, is when the administration is working directly with one of the most evil corporations in the world, Bayer, to do their bidding. And they have direct communications within the EPA, within the USDA, within the executive branch of our government, as well as in the Department of Justice, right? And we know this based on amazing investigative reporting from nonprofit organizations like U.S. Right to Know, like the Center for Biological Diversity, and others who have looked at FOIA requests, have looked at the ties of lobbying between different lobbying firms and Bayer and the administration's officials that are working in the executive branch and in the DOJ and in the EPA and at the USDA. And there is a long list of lobbyists and other people who have ties that is all illustrated on the U.S. Right to Know website that you can go look at. And this is something that is so maddening that it trumps all of the progress that's been made to date in a food activist's eyes and in the food movement's eyes, because the work to get immunity for a company like Bayer that has happened behind the scenes with the Trump administration deciding to submit a Solicitor General's brief on behalf of Bayer and in protection of Bayer's interests is a direct assault on the American people. It's a direct assault on the food movement. It's a direct assault on MAHA. And so that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And when you look at what Bayer says publicly about that statement and the work that the DOJ did on behalf of Bayer, you can see that is the most important thing that they have gotten in the last several months of this administration. And it's what's led, I think, to the increase of profits for them. I mean, they've gone up $35 billion in the last 4 or 5 months. They have a lot of money to spend on lobbying. They have a lot of money that's on the line here, and they are willing to do whatever they can and do their handshake deals at the very top to make this happen. And this is something that nobody who is part of the MAHA movement in Washington was able to stop. And that is very interesting to me. And it's also a strong signal that there is an inconsistency happening in Washington where we can make America healthy again to remove dyes, but we can't touch this. And that is something we've got to change. And the only way that I know how to change that is by continuing to organize the people, because I do believe people are more powerful than even every single politician in Washington, right? When we come together on issues, we can move the needle faster than anyone. After that Solicitor General statement in confirmation and in approval of the Supreme Court looking at this court case on behalf of Bayer, the president submitted an executive order to make glyphosate a national defense priority. This is something that, again, was like, Bayer throwing a hand grenade right at the food movement. And I want to be clear here that it doesn't matter who's in Washington. Both administrations have been doing Bayer's bidding year after year after year. And it is something that we're going to have to figure out how to unravel their grips on our politicians, the capture of our politicians. And I think the only way we can do that is to vote out the people who are doing this, but also we have to speak up in a way that is very loud and powerful. And after this executive order was issued, and after reading it and trying to study it with many different lawyers, it is a very problematic situation because in it, it has some immunity clauses. It gives the authority to the USDA to implement this policy, and depending upon what they do, could provide, blanket authority or blanket immunity for Bayer to not be held accountable for giving people cancer. And this is really problematic because we've never done anything like this in history. And this is something new that has happened that is really energizing the food movement in a way I've never seen before. People are frustrated. People are angry in a new way that I've never seen before, in a point where people are coming together. They're putting their politics aside, thank God, and coming together to make their voices heard. And I'm really excited about that. I'm going to be part of this incredible rally at the Supreme Court. It's called the People versus Poison. And there you will see an amazing coming together of voices that is going to speak out about the fact that Bayer should be held liable for causing cancer, the fact that no company should be given a liability shield, that the fact that this court case that is going to be seen that day on April 27th, it's called Monsanto versus Durnell. That court case and that decision will decide whether the EPA is the authority on chemical safety. And so that has implications of how 50,000 other chemicals are handled by the courts, and whether we can get protected and human health can be protected and we can hold these companies accountable. And I think, with giving these companies liability, it's what broke the camel's back in terms of where we're willing to, we will not stand down. We will keep fighting for this. And I keep kind of telling reporters, reporters keep calling me and they want me to comment on what's going to happen at the midterms. They want me to discuss politics and how the MAHA movement is faring, what's the temperature check, right? And what I keep telling them is we were very excited about getting the chemicals out of food. We were really excited about medical freedom. We were really, really excited about looking at the nutritional standards of infant formula, for example. We've been really excited about having someone like Dr. Casey Means become Surgeon General, right? We've been excited about all of these different things that have happened as a result. I'm just speaking personally here. Those are the things that really excited me, right? But I also see that there's a greater population and community out there that was really excited about these issues. We did not expect the Trump administration to go in exact opposition of the food movement by doing these few things. And there's going to be another thing that comes up, which is the 10-year review on glyphosate, which is due this year. And we are praying and hoping that the EPA actually tells the truth, that when they do their scientific comprehensive review process and they do quote unquote gold standard science, that they actually tell the truth, which is what court cases across America have found, other widely respected research and cancer organizations have found about glyphosate, and other studies. The main study that they use to designate glyphosate is not carcinogenic was retracted late last year. They have to acknowledge this, right? They have to tell the truth. And if we can get one thing out of our government in this administration, it would be to tell the truth about glyphosate and require a cancer warning label on Roundup. And I think if they just told the truth, if they just put a cancer warning label on Roundup, the market would fix itself. In Europe right now, people don't know this, and I'm just going to pull up the specifics here. In Europe, Europe still allows glyphosate, right? No one's asking for the outright ban of glyphosate. I think there's some activists that are, and I think that some activists understand the reality of we're really dependent upon these genetically engineered seeds like soy and corn, and we can't just make it magically disappear overnight, right? It's going to take time to off-ramp these farmers from these specific seeds that are dependent upon Roundup to keep growing. And so, but what's really interesting in Europe, they still allow glyphosate, but they have stricter rules with different formulations, okay? And some of the chemicals that were used in US Roundup are banned in Europe. Okay, so the European Roundup formulations are safer, and even Monsanto Bayer recognizes that in internal documentation in the Monsanto papers and other things that were released during the court cases. And they say, like, why? They like even made the comment, I think, that said, like, why don't we just use this everywhere? And that's what I'm wondering. Like, in the same respect of artificial food dyes and how Kellogg's can not use it in Korea and in China and Canada and Europe and keep poisoning us here, why are we allowing Bayer to keep poisoning us here when in Europe they're not allowed to use some surfactants, right? That diquat is not allowed to be put in the formulation, right? That many countries have a home garden ban. You're not allowed to use it in a home garden, right? And other public places. So we can, as a country, regulate glyphosate that would be similar to Europe, or we can do other measures like stop the pre-harvest desiccation use of glyphosate, the spraying of wheat to dry it off after harvest, which ends up going, the majority of human exposure comes from that application. There are some common sense things we could do as a government to address this. But I think the bottom line is just to tell the truth. And if the one thing we can get out of this rally is, first of all, to show that the people are united, that we will not stand for a company getting a liability shield. We will not stand for the Farm Bill to have a liability shield. We will not stand for the state legislators across the nation. There's 21 different states that the Modern Ag Alliance is doing right now to try to put in these pesticide liability shields at the state level. This organization is being funded by Bayer. They used a different name so that it sounds innocuous and it sounds like legit, but it's actually an organization funded by Bayer that is going to these different states and doing Bayer's bidding and making it look like farmers need this, that this is good for farmers, when actually the farmers are getting sick and getting cancer, and it's really against them. And I think what's so interesting is that when people use the farmer argument, you need to just replace the word farmer with big agricultural companies that are big ag farms that are selling food that we don't even see on our plates. Industrial corn and soy that's either going to feed animals, or it's going to ethanol, or it's going to ultra-processed foods, right? And so this is not something we want to support anyways. We want to change this, right? We want to go to more regenerative agriculture, more biodiverse crops. And so if we're ever going to tackle this, right, we have to start telling the truth about these chemicals and start reducing them like the other countries that have better health outcomes have already done.
It's so infuriating. I mean, listen, we've made so much progress because I remember back in the day when you first started coming out and speaking and blogging, looking at ingredients and being so confused. And now when I walk into the grocery stores, there are a lot of GMO verified. So we've made strides. A lot of these products have changed their formulations. They've gone more organic. They've cleaned it up. What's happening right now, as far as the protection of agricultural companies, is absolutely infuriating. And we know when liability protection is something that is in place, there is no incentive for the companies to make the product healthy or to make it safe. So talk a little bit about the People versus Poison rally again, give some details and just share the importance, because you said about putting politics aside, how important it is for people to stand together. It's the only way that any change ever happens.
That's right. I think this is going to be a moment that is going to be one of the most beautiful rallies that you'll ever see, that people are going to be coming together in a way that that truly brings the issues to the forefront of how our government's not going to save us, how we, the people, are going to have to save ourselves. And I think there's going to be incredible information being shared that day. There's amazing speakers that are coming forward that want to speak, all kinds of nonprofit organizations and other notable speakers and politicians who want to put their politics aside and just talk about these issues, which is very exciting. You can go to the peopleversuspoison.org to RSVP. This is a public rally. This is grassroots, right? This is, you come, you put your walking shoes on, you come join us in DC on April 27th at 9 a.m. inside the building. Monsanto versus Durnell will be heard. The hearing will be going on inside the building during the rally. I want them to hear us outside. That's how big I want to make this. I really want us, our energy and our voices and everything to vibrate the building, right? And to really show the media, show the government, show everyone out there that we are unified in this movement, that we are not going to let politics get in the way. We are going to keep pushing our government officials forward to tell the truth about these chemicals, to hold these companies accountable. And siding with one of the most evil companies in the world is not okay. And we're not going to just stand down and let it happen.
I love it. And no change has ever come without people standing together and making their voices heard. I've witnessed it myself. So I think it's super important. If you're in and around that area, definitely make a plan to be there. It will be a powerful event. Nothing stronger than when like-minded community comes together. One last thing, for people that are on this journey with food, that are trying to make some changes, what advice would you offer moms, family members that are overwhelmed when they walk into the supermarket? I remember the feeling all too well. What are one or two small changes that you could make that have a really big impact?
The biggest thing that you can do is to buy organic. Every single time you buy organic, you fight back. You fight back against the system that has put these chemicals in our environment. Glyphosate and Roundup is not allowed to be used on organic produce. So you are not supporting that system by buying organic. You are also safeguarding your system from thousands of different chemicals that are prohibited in organic that come from GMO crops or GMO ingredients. So that is the number one thing that you can do. And then the second thing is actually outside of the grocery store. It's to tell people the information that you are learning about the food system and share this information with the ones you love, to tell them why you are eating the way you do and you're purchasing the food that you are, because that is going to change the marketplace more than ever, which is basically to share this information. Because every time you share, a video like this or a podcast you hear about, some other person who's fighting for truth on this issue, the more people that learn about this, the more these bigger companies can't hide any longer, and we're demanding change. And I again want to say, glyphosate will likely determine the 2026 election. And it wasn't because we wanted to talk about glyphosate. It's because of the situation we've been put in with the executive order, with the Supreme Court case, and the EPA reviewing glyphosate this year. Glyphosate is the top of mind for every food activist and food movement leader online. And the women and the other community members and the everyday citizens that follow us, that have large communities of people that are wondering what's happening with food politics, they're going to be watching this. And these are the people that made the MAHA movement grow and create the enthusiasm that it had. And I think what's really interesting is, are we going to have a Make America Healthy movement go forward in the food movement, or are we going to go against that? And we're going to be seeing the answer to that from our leaders based on what happens this year.
I couldn't agree more. So you heard it right here. Vote with your wallet. Pay it forward, show up to have your voice heard, and let's make sure that everyone in power knows that this issue is important for us, it's important for our families, it's important for future generations. And Vani is proof that one person makes a difference, creates a ripple effect. There is an entire movement, and it starts with us. So no one is going to save us. Get out there, make a difference, show up for the People versus Poison rally, April 27th, DC. I will be there. I'm so honored, Vani, to have you here, to just hear the wealth of knowledge and everything that you've done in this space. We're so grateful for your work, and I can't wait to see you in person on the 27th. Thank you so much again for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Guys, we are live. So tell us your name, please.
My name is Lisa von Geldern.
And Lisa, you are sitting in front of us now and you survived the hospital COVID protocol.
Yes.
All right, let's go back and talk about, well, first question is, did you take the COVID-19 shot?
No, I was home during COVID, of course, like a lot of people. And I also did a postdoc fellowship at the U of A med school, so I know how to read the science. I'm an avid reader and studier anyway, and I knew that it was, the emergency use was nonsense, and I knew about all the alternative treatments early on. I did a lot of reading and studying, and I was not going to be experimented upon.
All right, so what got you to the point where you ended up in hospital? Did you have a pulsometer on your finger?
So what happened is I have happy hypoxia. What that means is that unlike a lot of people who get hypoxic where their oxygen drops, when my oxygen drops, I actually get a little energized at first, so that it's very dangerous because it drops down very badly all of a sudden. So I was sick for a little bit, and suddenly my oxygen was a 74, and I was having visual hallucinations. And my husband and a friend of mine who's a doctor who was coming to the home and trying to treat me. I also had an IV medic come in and give me medications trying to get me back on my feet, but it just didn't work. And finally my husband gave up and called an ambulance and had me go to the hospital. We'd gone to 3 different ERs because I had refused the COVID vaccine. They wouldn't treat me and they made me wait. And we went into the last one we went to, they did x-rays of my lungs. The doctor came out and said, "Oh, look, you have COVID lung here and here." And I'm barely functional. I couldn't talk, but I could think. And I thought, you ass, I have pneumonia. And he proudly told my husband that he had lied about his son's age in order to get his son the shots early. So my husband took me home. And finally he gave up because he didn't know what to do. And he called an ambulance and I was carted off to the hospital. And I was in a triage for about 3 days. I barely remember anything. At that point, my brain was not retaining very much. My husband tells me I called him and told him that I didn't want to live anymore. I do remember that I was in this triage space with another woman and she was moaning. And excuse the religiosity if it offends anyone, but I never expected this out of me. I guess I started shouting for the blood of Jesus to cover this woman. And she started crying. And I said, do you mind that I'm praying for you? And she said, no. I said, let's pray for everybody. So we started praying for everybody in the ER. And the next thing you knew, I had my own room. Imagine that. Couple of things. They never got me. I'd been in the hospital because I had an emergency C-section with my first child. So I'd been in the hospital before for something. And I know that you're supposed to get up and walk around. They never got me up and walked me around. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. And when I got out, I have hypotension. My POTS was more severe, and I've now been fainting and hitting my head because of low blood pressure, which gets exacerbated from sitting in the hospital like that. I asked the doctor about ivermectin. He told me no, that it was not proven. And I already knew that there had been over 54 studies proving it worked, but I was too weak to argue with him. They had me on high flow oxygen into my lungs because I had double pneumonia. And I kept pulling the mask off. And one night, a nurse walked into the room furious with me that I had pulled the mask off again, and she had to readjust it, and she walked to the door of my room. And be nice to me and I'll let you kill me, I guess is the rule here, because be mean and I'll fight back. And she got to the door and she could hear the alarm again out at the nurse's station, and she turned on her heel and she threatened me. She said, you've torn it off again, I'm gonna have you intubated. When I went in, I gave orders, no remdesivir, no intubation. My medical paperwork says, not a good candidate for remdesivir. It doesn't say patient refused remdesivir. And when she said that to me, I woke up enough to say, do your job. This hurts. I want to go home to my husband. Your job is to help me. Do your job. And she came over and her eyes flicked to this huge saline bag. It was empty. I followed her eyes. The bag was empty and it was not connected to any of my equipment. And she said, oh, I need to change this. And she left the room and she got a saline bag and hooked it up, and suddenly I wasn't in so much agony from the dry, cold air being blown at high speed into my lungs. I don't know if that was on purpose to get me intubated or not. The next thing I can tell you is that I was having conversations with my husband. I accidentally broke my cell phone, so I needed a new cell phone. I needed cords to charge it, and he had to drive 45 minutes every morning to go and get me a latte and bring me a latte. That was what he was trying to do, because I was craving the caffeine to kind of wake myself up. And he would bring me the lattes, and in the bottom of the bag were medications. Medications the hospital wouldn't give me that I had every right to. Ivermectin.
And how did he get into the hospital? Because no one else seems to.
He could go to the door and tell them what room I was in and that this was for me, and it was a bag with coffee in it.
And they gave it to you?
And they would give me the bag with the cords and the coffee.
So you started taking ivermectin?
I started sneaking the ivermectin. And after 3 days, the doctor who wouldn't give me ivermectin came in and said, young lady, I'll actually be 59 tomorrow, I'm not that young. Young lady, you're a miracle. You're going to be able to go home. You're getting better. If this keeps up, you're going to be able to go home. So that's my story. Let's see. The other thing is they offered me experimental medications. They wanted, I don't know what they were, but they wanted to use some experimental medications on me. And I've had a high D-dimer level in the past, which means clotting issues. And I asked them if it would affect that, and they said yes. And I said, then I don't want it.
Can we go back to the coffee and the ivermectin?
Yeah,
because I find
go.
it fascinating. Just describe to me what it looked. Was it a little bag, and was it the ivermectin?
My husband would bring me a bag from Starbucks, a little white bag, and it had the coffee in it, right? And sometimes there'd be a cord or something. My husband took the medications. So as you know, we're in Tucson, Arizona, and I went over the border and bought thousands of dollars worth of medications and shipped them all over the country to friends and family who requested them.
Afterwards, this is
Before, but it never occurred to me, like I said, happy hypoxia, that I was sick enough to need those medications. That's how I got so sick.
The ivermectin was in the bag.
He just put a foil, he wrapped some up in foil and put it in the bag.
This is a fascinating story.
Nobody looked in the bag.
And then 3 days later he came and got you?
3 days later, the doctor told me I would get well enough, and a couple days after that I was able to go home.
Now, how are you feeling today? Have you got any injury from your time in hospital?
Yes, I have injuries.
Tell me about it.
The first 8 months out of the hospital, I have long COVID is what they're calling it. Who knows what that really is? I believe it's brain damage from the low oxygen and them refusing to treat me early on for the double pneumonia. And so I have short-term, I have difficulty forming new memories and keeping track of things. My executive function has been damaged. And I also have, shortness of breath. So I now have the glass in the lungs, the images on the x-rays show scarring in my lungs. So staying oxygenated well enough is difficult. I'm afraid to exercise in the way that I might in the past, to go for a walk without my husband in my neighborhood, because what if I can't get back? So I'm damaged. I have to write everything down now, which is okay. Handwriting's good for you. It's good for the brain.
I'm just so pleased you're alive and sitting there.
Well, I wasn't for a long time. It's been over 2 years now since I got out of the hospital. And for about the first 8 months, it was like crawling through broken glass. And I kept wondering, why did God allow me to live? And I finally came to the conclusion that I'm here to serve others. And anything I can do to help others. My work that I do now is here to serve our country. I serve our country and to educate people, to wake them up. And this sitting here with you is just another opportunity to do that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.